Christmas used to mean something in my house. It meant cinnamon rolls rising before dawn. It meant my daughter's laughter drifting down the staircase like music. It meant safety. Now, when I hear Christmas carols, I taste iron. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I built my life the slow way, brick by brick, deal by deal. 40 years in commercial real estate across 3 states. I started with nothing but a pickup truck and a borrowed suit. By 62, I owned buildings that bore my company's name in polished steel letters. But none of that mattered the day my daughter married Eric Caldwell. Eric was polished, educated, charming in that rehearsed way that makes people lean in. He ran a fast, growing tech logistics firm and liked to remind everyone that his empire was built on innovation. The first time he shook my hand, his grip was firm, a little too firm. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sir," he said at the wedding rehearsal, "I'll take care of her." I remember staring at him and thinking, you'd better. My daughter, Emily, has always been the soft part of me. She believed in people the way I believe in contracts, fully and without hesitation. When her mother died, I promised I'd protect her from the world. But I didn't protect her from him. At first, everything looked perfect. The big house in the suburbs, the holiday photos, the charity galas, Eric calling me Dad in public, even though something about the word felt like a business strategy. There were signs, of course. Emily stopped wearing certain dresses. She laughed less at family dinners. When I asked if she was happy, she'd smile quickly and say, "Of course, Dad, you worry too much." And maybe I did. I had always believed that power was about control, controlling assets, negotiations, outcomes. But I never realized how powerless I would feel watching my own daughter slowly dim beside a man who called himself her husband. Christmas morning was supposed to be about forgiveness and family. Instead, it became the day I discovered how fragile trust really is and how dangerous a father can become when it's shattered. I didn't know it yet, but before that day ended, everything Eric Caldwell built would begin to fall, and I would be the one to push the first domino. The sound didn't register at first. It was Christmas morning. Snow pressed softly against the windows. Cinnamon and pine filled the house. I was in the kitchen pouring coffee when I heard it, a sharp crack, followed by something heavier hitting the hardwood floor. Then silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that swallows oxygen. I walked toward the living room slowly. I don't know why I moved slowly. Maybe some part of me already knew that once I saw it, there would be no going back. Emily was on the floor near the tree. Her cheek was red, not flushed, red in a way that doesn't belong on Christmas morning. Eric stood over her, breathing hard, his hand still half, raised as if it hadn't yet decided what it had just done. For a split second, no one spoke. Then he said, "She embarrassed me." Embarrassed him. As if that explained everything, I helped my daughter up. She wouldn't look at me. That hurt more than the mark on her face. Her eyes were glossy but dry, the eyes of someone who had learned that crying only makes things worse. "Dad, it's fine," she whispered. "Fine." I looked at Eric, and something ancient stirred inside me. Not rage, not yet. Something colder, calculation. "You should leave," I said quietly. He scoffed. "This is my house." That word, my, landed like a confession. You see, the house wasn't his. The down payment had come from a trust I set up for Emily when her mother died. The trust I managed. The trust Eric had been lobbying to restructure for months under the excuse of investment growth. Suddenly, every financial suggestion he'd made felt less like ambition and more like strategy. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Don't interfere in my marriage, Daniel. You may have built buildings, but you don't understand how the modern world works." I understood enough. I understood power when I saw it abused. I understood leverage. And I understood that a man who would strike his wife in her father's house on Christmas morning wasn't acting out of impulse. He was acting out of entitlement. Emily clutched my arm. "Please," she murmured, not to him. "To me, please don't make it worse." That was the moment I realized something terrifying. This wasn't the first time. Eric straightened his jacket and walked toward the hallway. "We'll talk about this later," he said to her. Not if I had anything to say about it. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten him. I didn't call the police, not yet. Instead, I walked back into the kitchen, picked up my phone, and stared at one contact in particular, a name I hadn't needed in years. Because some battles aren't won with fists. They're won with information. And I had just decided to go to war. I didn't make the call. Not that day. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen, my heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt since my early business days when one wrong signature could cost me everything. Only this time the stakes weren't financial. They were flesh and blood. Emily stayed upstairs for hours. Eric left around noon, slamming the front door hard enough to shake the wreath loose. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He simply left, like a man confident he'd return to the same arrangement. That confidence unsettled me more than the punch. When Emily finally came down, the mark on her cheek had faded to a dull pink. She had covered it with makeup, as if erasing evidence would erase reality. "Dad, please don't do anything," she said softly, sitting across from me at the dining table. The Christmas ham sat untouched between us. "Has he done this before?" I asked. Silence. That was my answer. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "It's complicated." No, it wasn't. What was complicated was my role in all of this. I had introduced Eric to key investors at my firm when his company was still a startup. I had vouched for him. I had signed letters of recommendation that opened doors he couldn't have opened alone. His so-called empire had grown in the shadow of my credibility. Had I created the monster who hurt my daughter? That thought gnawed at me. For years I believed success protected the people you loved. I built assets, trusts, safeguards. I thought money was armor. But money can also become leverage, especially in the hands of someone ambitious and morally hollow. Emily reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "I can handle him," she said. "No father wants to hear that. Handle him." Like he was a difficult client. Like endurance was a marital skill. "You shouldn't have to handle your husband," I said quietly. She pulled her hand back. "If you go after him, he'll ruin me. The company is in both our names now. The investors trust him. If he falls, I fall." There it was. Control. He hadn't just raised his hand to her. He had entangled her financially, legally, publicly. If he went down, she'd be collateral damage. And for the first time since Christmas morning, I hesitated. Revenge is easy when you have nothing to lose. But when your daughter's future sits on the same chessboard as your anger, every move feels dangerous. That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at old photos of Emily as a child. I had promised her mother I would protect her. But protection doesn't always mean shielding someone from the storm. Sometimes it means becoming the storm. I picked up my phone again. This time my hand didn't shake. The call lasted 11 minutes. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mark," I said when he answered, "I need a full background review on Eric Caldwell. Financials, partnerships, offshore exposure." Quietly. There was a pause on the other end. Mark Delaney had been my corporate attorney for 30 years. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. That's why I trusted him. "Define quietly," he replied. "No subpoenas. No paper trail leading back to me. I want to know where every dollar came from and where it's going." Another pause. "That's serious."
"Yes."
He didn't press further. "Give me 72 hours. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I was looking for truth. Because men like Eric rarely build empires without cutting corners. And if he'd raised his hand to my daughter so easily, I doubted ethics slowed him down in business either. The next 3 days were a lesson in restraint. Emily barely spoke about Christmas. She moved through the house like someone trying not to disturb fragile glass. Eric returned as if nothing had happened, charming, controlled, attentive when others were around. He even brought flowers. I watched him carefully. I noticed how he checked her phone, how he corrected her mid-sentence, how his smile stiffened when she spoke too confidently. Control wasn't just emotional, it was systematic. On the third evening, Mark called back. "You were right to look," he said without greeting. My jaw tightened. "How bad?" "Worse than aggressive accounting. There are shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, funds moving through a Cayman holding entity, at least 2 investor disclosures that don't match internal reporting. Fraud. Not proven yet, but circling it. And here's the interesting part," Mark continued. "Most of the shared marital assets, including your daughter's trust injection into their house, were leveraged to secure private loans for his expansion. If regulators look closely, she's exposed." My stomach dropped. He hadn't just hit her. He had tied her to his risk, I asked. "With careful timing," Mark said. "If scrutiny lands after she's legally separated from operational control, she walks cleaner." Careful timing. This wasn't about destroying him recklessly. This was about precision. That night, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and reviewed every document Mark sent. The pattern was clear: inflated projections, hidden debt, silent investors who preferred anonymity. Eric hadn't built an empire. He'd built a house of cards, and I now held the wind. But power must be used deliberately. If I moved too soon, Emily would be buried in the fallout. If I moved too late, he'd grow stronger. Revenge, I realized, isn't about rage, it's about patience. I sent Mark one final message before Betty. Prepare the separation framework, quietly. Because when the first domino falls, I want my daughter standing far away from the collapse. The first move in a war is rarely visible. That's what Eric never understood. He believed power was measured in headlines, valuation rounds, and how many people applauded when he entered a room. I knew better. Real power moves in silence. I started with Emily. Lunch, I told her one afternoon, just you and me. She hesitated, then agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant across town, no social media crowd, no business associates lurking in corners. She looked tired. Not physically. Spiritually. I need you to listen to me carefully, I said once our plates arrived untouched. I'm not asking you to leave him today. I'm not asking you to accuse him of anything. I'm asking you to protect yourself. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What does that mean? It means you step down from operational control at the company, temporarily. Health reasons, stress, anything believable. She stiffened. Poor Eric will never agree to that. This isn't about what he agrees to. It's about what you do. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were draft documents Mark prepared, advisory leave paperwork, asset shielding revisions, legal separation options that could be executed quietly if necessary. She stared at them like they were explosives. Dade, what did you find? I held her gaze. Enough to know that if something happens to his company, I don't want your name chained to it. Silence fell between us. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not of me, but of what she already suspected. He's been moving money, she whispered. Not a question, a confession. You knew? I didn't want to look too closely. That hurt, but I understood. Denial is safer than truth when your whole life depends on it. She took a slow breath. If I step back, he'll be furious. Yes, I said calmly. He will. And that was part of the design. Because the more isolated his decisions became, the clearer the liability trail would be. Once she removed herself, every questionable move would point solely to him. That evening, Emily told him she needed a break from the company. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He smiled. That terrified me more than anger would have. Of course, sweetheart, he told her. If that's what you need. A man who agrees too easily is a man planning something. Within days, filings were adjusted. Her operational authority paused. Her exposure narrowed, and then quietly I made the second call. Not to a lawyer this time. To a federal compliance consultant who specialized in anonymous reporting channels. I didn't accuse. I simply provided documents. Let professionals ask the questions. By the end of that week, regulators began requesting clarifications from Eric's company. Small inquiries, harmless on the surface. But I knew what they were. The first tremors before an earthquake. And for the first time since Christmas morning, I slept without clenching my fists. The knock on my office door came 3 weeks later. Not a polite knock, a controlled one, measured, angry. Eric stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His suit was immaculate, but the polish had cracked. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his jaw was tight enough to split stone. You've been busy, he said, closing the door behind him. I didn't look up immediately. I finished signing the document in front of me, capped my pen, then met his gaze. I always am. His laugh was sharp. Regulators don't just start sniffing around for no reason. I folded my hands. If your books are clean, you have nothing to worry about. He stepped closer to my desk. Don't insult me. There it was, the entitlement again, the assumption that he was untouchable. What exactly are you accusing me of? I asked calmly. You think I don't see the timing? He snapped. Emily steps down, and suddenly there are compliance reviews. Investors are asking questions. Lines of credit are tightening. Good, I thought. But I didn't say that. Instead, I leaned back in my chair. Maybe the problem isn't timing. Maybe it's structure. His eyes darkened. You're trying to destroy me. No, I said evenly. I'm protecting my daughter. That landed. He straightened slowly, his voice lowering into something colder. If my company collapses, she loses everything. Her lifestyle, her reputation, you'll humiliate her along with me. You already humiliated her, I replied, on Christmas morning. For the first time since he walked in, he looked unsettled. That was a private matter. No, I said quietly. It was a revelation. Silence stretched between us. Then he made his mistake. You think anyone will believe you over me, he said. I built that company. Investors trust me. The board trusts me. I can spin this however I want. Spin, so he wasn't denying anything. I'm not your enemy, Eric, I said softly. Your decisions are. He slammed his hand on my desk. You started this. No, I answered. You did. The moment you thought power meant ownership, of money, of reputation, of my daughter. His breathing was heavier now. The composed executive mask was slipping. You have no proof, he said finally. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Proof has a way of surfacing when people start asking the right questions. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, and the color drained slightly from his face. Board meeting moved up. Emergency session. The trimmers were turning into cracks. He looked back at me, fury burning behind calculation. This isn't over. I know, I said calmly. It's just beginning. He walked out without another word. As the door closed, I allowed myself one slow breath. This was the dangerous phase, when cornered men make reckless choices. But I had prepared for that, because empires built on deception don't collapse in explosions. They collapse in stages, and the foundation was already crumbling. The dominoes began falling faster than I anticipated. Within days, Eric's carefully curated world started to unravel. Investors began asking uncomfortable questions. Banks requested detailed audits. Press whispers started circulating about discrepancies in his company filings. He called me once, furious, voice low and dangerous, but I didn't answer. Silence was more devastating than confrontation. Emily, meanwhile, was safe. She had stepped back from operational control at precisely the right moment. Her name was clear on all legal documents. She could watch from the sidelines as her husband's empire, the empire I had once quietly facilitated, collapsed under the weight of his own lies. I watched her reaction closely. Relief flickered in her eyes, mixed with disbelief. Dad, I can't believe it's happening. She whispered over dinner one night. Her hands shook slightly, but not from ration. Eric, of course, didn't go quietly. There were threats. Subtle at first, legal letters, hints of personal exposure. But then came the loud ones, phone calls in the dead of night, furious texts, a few shadowy visitors to my office asking questions I ignored. Each attempt to intimidate only confirmed how deeply he had relied on fear to maintain control. And then came the inevitable. A federal investigation was announced publicly. Media outlets picked up the story: financial mismanagement, offshore accounts, and the use of marital assets to secure risky loans. Headlines splashed across screens nationwide. The empire Eric claimed was invincible suddenly appeared fragile, hollow, and corrupt. I didn't celebrate. Not really. This wasn't about glee. This was about justice, the slow, deliberate kind. Emily finally felt free to breathe again, and for that the tension I carried for weeks began to lift. Yet the aftermath carried its own weight. Some old business partners avoided me. Some whispered that I had played dirty. I accepted that. Real power, I reminded myself, is rarely clean. Sometimes it demands a moral compromise to protect what matters most. And Eric, he retreated into the shadows, a man stripped of influence, credibility, and control. A few investors remained loyal, but his company's valuation plummeted. He had built his empire on ambition without integrity, and now he was paying the price. That night, as I looked at Emily sleeping peacefully, I understood something profoundly simple: the world doesn't protect innocence. Sometimes, protection requires cold calculation, patience, and the courage to act when emotions are dangerous. The dust settled slowly. Emily and I spent quiet evenings together, the kind where the only noise was the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the old house. Christmas had passed, and with it, the shadow of that morning lingered less with each passing day. She smiled more freely now, her laughter returning like sunlight through cracked blinds. Eric was gone. His company reduced to fragments, his reputation in tatters. Social media whispered rumors, financial news outlets chronicled the collapse. He had fought tooth and nail to maintain control, but he had underestimated the quiet patience of someone protecting family. I never sought his public humiliation. I never called the press. I never gloated. My satisfaction was quieter than that, in knowing Emily was safe, in knowing the man who struck her could no longer threaten her, financially or emotionally. We rebuilt what we could. Not the empire, not the illusions, but the trust, the bond between father and daughter. Emily began managing her own investments again, but this time with clear boundaries, safeguards, and wisdom earned through pain. She learned that power can be a weapon, but it can also be armor when wielded responsibly. And me, I understood that revenge, though tempting in its immediate gratification, is only meaningful when guided by justice and restraint. A single call, a measured series of moves, and a careful strategy had toppled the man who believed he was untouchable. But the lesson wasn't in his downfall. The lesson was in survival, in foresight, and in the moral responsibility to protect those you love. I think about that Christmas morning often. The moment of betrayal, the anger, the fear. It still sends a chill down my spine. But it also reminds me of something vital. True strength isn't measured by how much you can destroy, but by how effectively you can shield those who depend on you. Some people believe revenge is a shallow pleasure. They are wrong. Revenge, when calculated and disciplined, is a form of protection. And protection, when it saves someone you love, is profound. The house is quiet now. The ornaments are still on the tree, faded slightly with time. I sit in my office, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity. I did what I had to do. Emily is safe. Eric learned the cost of arrogance and violence. And I learned the power of patience, strategy, and moral responsibility. Reflection. Life often presents us with moments where justice and emotion collide. True strength lies not in impulsive action, but in measured, deliberate choices that safeguard those who matter most, proving that even in darkness, strategy can bring light. The storm has passed, but the lesson remains.